So we're going to take a look at the first two pictures that are on this page, because they're basically of the same thing. One of them is a more realistic looking picture, and the other one is sort of a more artistic representation, cartoony looking thing. And I like to show both because sometimes if we only show the cartoony looking thing, you get a misconception about what a structure is actually like. So we're just going to label some parts. A lot of the parts are on both of the diagrams, so I'll label them on both things. The first part that we'll label are your nasal sinuses. Now, like it suggests, it is to do with your nose. Your sinus is basically a cavity in behind your nose. Now, it's your nasal sinuses because there are several cavities back there. They actually all have their own names, but that's a detail that I wouldn't expect for you to know. But you have cavities sort of in behind your nose and then in behind your cheeks as well. And so sometimes when you have a sinus infection or a sinus cold, it puts pressure on parts of your face that you wouldn't normally associate with being sick, because those cavities, those sinuses, sort of extend out all the way through the whole front of your face. Nasal sinuses, warm, clean, and humidify. That's their job. So if you have ever heard someone tell you to breathe in through your nose, there is a scientific reason why it is better to breathe in through your nose than in through your mouth. Scientific reason number one is that air that comes in through your nose is warmer, is cleaner, and is more humid than air that you would breathe in through your mouth. And that's because it has to pass through your nasal sinuses. So it is better, if you would like to have warm, clean, and moist air in your lungs, which is preferable, for you to breathe in through your nose. The other reason is that a lot of research would indicate that breathing through your mouth sends a signal of panic or stress to your body. And so normally, breathing through your mouth would be necessary when you need incredibly large volumes of air really quickly. That's when most people tend to breathe through their mouth, unless, of course, you're sleeping and you don't know that it's happening. But I know for me, when I'm running, I'll start breathing through my mouth, and when I start breathing through my mouth, I can feel my heart rate increase, and so if I try to take some deep breaths in through my nose, I can calm myself down a bit, and so that would be the other reason. There's not a big sciencey description that I'm going to put there for that one. So that's your nasal sinus. Now the next few structures, some of them are on the diagram on the left only, like they're only labeled there, and some of them obviously are not. I'm going to start with number 2 because it's on both of them. Number 2, which would be this line here and over here, this is your larynx. Does anyone know what your larynx is? So if you touch your throat and you talk, you can feel something vibrating. That is your larynx. If you're a guy, you have an Adam's apple, feel there, larynx. Your larynx is your voice box. That is how you make sounds. If your larynx were damaged or air could not pass over your larynx, you would not be able to speak. So, if for some reason your mouth is compromised and you have to breathe through a tube, the probability of you being able to talk is greatly reduced because air has to go across your larynx to make your vocal cords vibrate so that you can get this sound effect from it. If air is not passing over your larynx, you can't talk. Now, in between your larynx and your nasal sinuses are a bunch of other pieces. Right above your larynx, we would have your epiglottis. It's a little piece of tissue. It's like the trap door to your respiratory system. The epiglottis covers the opening. It's so that food does not go into your lungs. So we would have briefly mentioned this idea when we talked about your digestive system, that food is supposed to go down your esophagus, not into your respiratory system. But the epiglottis is this little flap of tissue. It often looks like a little trapdoor that can go up or down. It's not labeled, like there's no number for it on this picture, but sort of right there where it looks like there's a little flap, that would be what we would call epiglottis on the other picture. Now the other thing right above epiglottis would be your pharynx, and we already know what that is. It's the opening through which air and food go through to get from your mouth into your throat. The line above it would be your mouth, or we could call this the oral cavity. Now, pharynx and larynx sound a lot alike. It would be easy to mix them up. I would put them as the wrong answer for a question about the other. So if I was asking you something that was about your larynx, I would definitely put pharynx as one of the wrong answers because they sound the same. And they're really close together. Now the next piece on the list is your trachea. It's number 3 on the cartoonish looking diagram. Your trachea is drawn as what looks like sort of a corrugated cardboard pipe, and this is purposeful. Your trachea is cartilaginous. It is your windpipe. That would be its common name. It is how air is going to get from your mouth or from your nose down to your lungs. So you can often recognize the trachea by this characteristic bumpy look to it. What we're saying is that your windpipe or your trachea is not just a floppy piece of tissue. It's got some cartilage there. It's got something giving it structure. Now that's for protection. You wouldn't want your trachea to easily be crushed, because if it was, you would not be able to get air into your lungs. Now if we continue on, I'll label number 4 here because it's not on the other picture. It's really hard to show where your ribs are if you're trying to show your respiratory system as well, because they actually go right over top of it. So very often to represent ribs, you'll see these little circles indicating where the bone would protrude from. Now, realistically, the bone comes all the way over the front of your whole entire chest cavity. But that's how a rib would typically look on a picture. And then 8 is pointing at the thing that's in between your ribs. These are your intercostal muscles. Inter means between. Costal means ribs. If you speak any sort of Romance language, you might know that the word for ribs is cote, C-O-T-E, with an accent, but nonetheless. So that's where the costal comes from. Unfortunately for us, science is not based on a Germanic language, so it doesn't usually sound like English. But that's what intercostal means, between your ribs. So there are muscles in between your ribs that help them move in and out so that you can breathe. Now, if we come over to the other side, number 5 is pointing to, and sometimes it's a little hard to see, there's like a branch. What happened to my pen? There's a branch that comes off of each side of your trachea. Those are your bronchi. There are 2 of them. Bronchi is the plural, bronchus would be the singular. Six would be what we call your alveoli. They're like little sacs at the end of the tubes of your lungs. And number 7 is sort of the area around the lung. We would call this the pleural membrane. So the picture on the right gave us a few of the inside detailed pieces. There was no line that was actually pointing at lungs, so we'll do that on the other one. This is your right lung, even though it's on the left side of the picture. And this is your left lung. It is smaller. Does anyone know why it's smaller? There's like a big thing that's in the way. Yeah. Because your heart's there. So this line down here in the middle here, this one, that is your heart. That is why your left lung is smaller. There's stuff in your thoracic cavity. Now, much like the picture above, or the picture to the right, then we're labeling some of the other parts of the lung. Now, your lungs actually have lobes to them, like there are different sections to the lung, and we're not going to get into the details of what the different parts of your lung are called. We're going to focus only on the parts that the air is going through, so the trachea, bronchi, etc. The other thing that I would like to label just as a whole is this. The entire space in which your lungs and your heart is contained is called your thoracic cavity.